The Shadow Realm bar was quieter than usual. Shadows flickered in the dim lighting, casting eerie patterns across the walls. Rose lounged at her usual table, watching the ebb and flow of patrons with a faint smirk, content to simply observe, her presence an unsettling yet magnetic force in the room. But her evening took an unexpected turn when a familiar figure appeared, sticking to the edges of the shadows like a creature hunted. The trader. He slinked in, gaze darting to every corner, shoulders hunched with paranoia, and approached Rose's table with a hesitance she hadn't seen before. She arched an eyebrow, taking in his dishevelled appearance and nervous eyes. The trader had once been proud, confident, a man whose power rivaled some of the most formidable creatures, but now, stripped of his birthright and scrambling for anything to restore his lost power, he was a shadow of his former self. "Well, well," Rose purred, her voice dripping with feigned sympathy. "If it isn't the infamous trader. What brings you here looking like a dog who lost his bone?" He glared but swallowed whatever retort had come to mind, opting instead for a more subdued tone. I need your help, Rose." She tilted her head, a mocking smile spreading across her face. "My help? Since when does the mighty trader ask anyone for help?" "Since she took everything," he hissed, bitterness flashing in his eyes. "Calithra. She stripped me of my powers, my birthright. I have nothing left, Rose. I need to reclaim what's mine." Rose's gaze sharpened, her smile deepening. "Oh, I'd love to hear more about how you lost everything. But you're here for something more specific, aren't you?" She leaned back, crossing her arms. "So, tell me, trader, what exactly do you want?" He glanced around, his voice dropping to a tense whisper. "There's a drug. I've heard it's circulating here in the human world, and that it can grant strength, even power. I need it." Rose laughed, a rich, taunting sound that echoed in the dim room. "You want to reclaim your power with a little pill? Oh, how the mighty have fallen. And here I thought you still had some pride left." He scowled, his jaw tightening. "Do you have it or not?" Rose leaned forward, her voice like velvet, a dangerous gleam in her eyes. "Maybe I do. Maybe I don't. Either way, it'll cost you." "Everything's already been taken," he snapped, though there was a desperate tremor in his voice. "What more could you possibly want?" She smiled, a slow, predatory grin. "Your loyalty. When I call for it, I want your absolute, unquestioning loyalty. Think of it as a debt, to be repaid whenever I see fit." He hesitated, his pride and desperation at war, but ultimately, his need for power won out. "Fine," he muttered through gritted teeth, though his face twisted with barely concealed resentment. "Whatever it takes." Rose's smirk deepened, satisfaction glittering in her eyes. "Perfect. Now, as for this little elixir of yours, I'll see what I can dig up. Just remember." Her voice softened, a whisper edged with malice. "There's always a price, trader. Always." As he turned to leave, her voice echoed in his mind, a sinister reminder of the bargain he'd just made. Watching him slink away, Rose felt a dark thrill pulse through her veins. She'd have to move quickly if she wanted to get ahead of whoever was behind this drug. Once she was alone, Rose pulled out her phone and dialed a number she'd acquired through subtle charms and tricks. She waited, almost giddy with amusement as the line connected. Darren was deep into the evening, cleaning his shotgun, when his phone buzzed, breaking his concentration. He glanced down, frowning at the unknown number lighting up the screen. With a slight sigh, he picked up. "Yeah, who's this?" A familiar, sultry voice answered, dripping with playful mischief. "Darren, darling, you wound me. How could you not recognize the voice of your favorite queen?" He froze, caught completely off guard. "How the hell did you get my number?" A light laugh came through the receiver. "Oh, please, I have my ways. Besides, I thought you'd be thrilled to hear from me. I'm inviting you for a drink. Promise I won't cast any spells on you, unless you ask nicely." Darren raised an eyebrow, glancing over his shoulder to make sure no one was listening in. Uh-huh. And I'm supposed to believe this isn't some trap? Don't take this the wrong way, but I'm allergic to supernatural entanglements. Rose let out a sigh, clearly savouring the moment. You wound me again. I'm just offering you a professional exchange. Seems we share a little mystery, and I know you've got a sample of the funny new drug circulating around my territory. Darren's interest piqued, though his suspicion didn't waver. You got a name for this drug? Let's just call it a nuisance for now. Meet me at the bar later, and we'll talk details. Don't be late, Darren. I'd hate to think you didn't trust me. With a sly chuckle, she hung up, leaving Darren staring at his phone with a mix of confusion and suspicion. He needed to be prepared, so he headed straight for Eli's workshop. She was engrossed in her latest experiment, barely glancing up when he entered. You'll never guess who just invited me out for drinks, he said, holding up his phone. Without missing a beat, Eli replied, I'm going to guess it wasn't Clara offering to help you train. Funny, he muttered. It was Rose. She somehow got my number and promised not to cast any spells on me. You wouldn't happen to have any enchantment shields lying around, would you? Finally looking up, Eli smirked. Oh, the great Darren, afraid of a little enchantment. What's next, asking me to babysit you? Very funny. I just don't trust her. She's got that whole I'll eat you alive and smile about it vibe. She chuckled, handing him a small enchanted amulet. Here, this should block any charms or glamours she might throw your way. But remember, no amulet's foolproof. If you find yourself falling for her, that's on you. He tucked the amulet under his shirt, grumbling. That's reassuring. Thanks, Keebler. Later that night, Darren arrived at the bar, the amulet securely in place. He spotted Rose lounging at a corner table, her red hair casting an eerie glow under the dim lights. As he approached, she gave him a smile that was both inviting and dangerous. Ah, I see you're still upright and breathing. Good start. Darren slid into the seat across from her, matching her grin with a smirk of his own. You'd be surprised how often that's a victory. They exchanged banter, each one testing the other, but underneath it all, Darren could sense something darker brewing. Rose leaned in, her playful tone dropping. So, about this little drug floating around, you're not the only one interested in its origins. I want it off my turf, but that's hard to do without a source. Darren raised an eyebrow, taking a sip of his drink. Sounds like the Queen's losing control. Thought you had eyes everywhere in this place. With a dangerous smile, she leaned even closer. Careful, Earthborn. You've got one piece of the puzzle, but if you'd rather sip your drink and walk away, I could always find another ally. Her tone was layered with a barely concealed threat, but Darren didn't flinch. He studied her, catching a flash of something in her gaze, something personal. Fine, he said, holding her stare. You want this taken off your turf? Let's start with what you know. She slid a folded note across the table with names marked down, users and their strange side effects. Rose watched him pocket the list, her smirk returning as if satisfied by his reaction. Be careful, Darren, she whispered, her voice a velvet warning. You're dealing with more than you realise. He gave her one last look before standing to leave, feeling the weight of her gaze lingering like a promise. Behind him, Rose watched with a knowing smile, fingers idly brushing the bracelet that kept her magic in check, already planning her next move. Darren strode into the workshop, his steps purposeful, but a glint of mischief danced in his eyes. He'd just come from a rather enlightening meeting with Rose. She had provided more questions than answers, and he was ready to loop in the team, sensing that they were standing on the edge of something big and sinister. He found Gunnar leaning over a set of blueprints in the workshop, studying them intently. Without any formalities, Darren slid up beside him, his voice low but with a hint of urgency. Hey, I think we need to bring Sophia in on this, Darren began, making it sound almost like a casual afterthought, though his tone betrayed his real intent. Gunnar looked up, giving him that familiar no-nonsense look. Sophia, you think she's caught wind of this drug? Darren shrugged, a smirk on his face. Come on, it's Sophia. The woman knows things before the rest of us even suspect anything. And besides, she's got connections that run way deeper than ours. Might as well tap into them, right? Gunnar crossed his arms, thoughtful. Sophia was more than just an asset. She had her own web of informants, contacts, and the occasional favour owed, which extended well into the supernatural underworld. If there were whispers about this drug circulating among the shadows, Sophia would have already heard them. Gunnar gave a slight nod. All right. We bring her in, but carefully. I don't want her in the crossfire without a clear plan. Darren grinned, clearly pleased. Perfect. I'll make the call. Get Eli in here too, Gunnar added. She's already been working on analysing that sample, and I want her input on how we're going to handle this. We'll pull in Karina too. This is her fight as much as ours. And make sure Shade's looped in. His connections with Nythoria might give us an edge. An hour later, the team assembled in the workshop's briefing room, a dimly lit space lined with walls of ancient maps, tactical screens, and weapons. Eli stood at the holoprojector in the centre, fingers gliding over a glowing control panel, as images of the Shadow Realm bar flickered to life before them. The holo display cast a cool blue light across the room, illuminating their faces in eerie shades. Karina sat at the edge of the table, arms crossed, her expression set in stone. Her violet eyes flickered with intensity, the memory of her last encounter with the trader fresh in her mind. Across from her, Shade sat silently, his dark eyes narrowed as he observed every detail of the display, his face unreadable. Darren leaned back in his chair, relaxed yet focused, occasionally glancing at the others as they absorbed the information Eli had meticulously compiled. Eli adjusted the display, and several locations where traces of the drug had been detected highlighted on the holomap, each one connected by thin, pulsing lines. All right, so here's what we know, Eli began, tapping a point on the map where the Shadow Realm bar was prominently marked. This bar isn't just any dive. It's one of the most well-guarded places, both in terms of physical and magical defenses. And yet, the trader and a few other dealers seem to be moving this drug under everyone's radar. She zoomed in on another hotspot, a rundown warehouse in the city's industrial zone, then a quiet back alley near a high-end club. These are the other places where the drug has been reported. It's being moved in small quantities, likely to avoid detection. What we don't know is who's supplying it and why. Gunnar leaned forward, studying the display, his expression dark. And the drug itself? What did you find, Eli? Eli exchanged a glance with Darren. It's potent. Based on what I've gathered so far, it's designed specifically to affect supernatural beings. Gives them a high, an edge in strength, but it's volatile. Humans who've accidentally taken it? Dead within minutes. For our kind, though, it's addictive. Deadly addictive. Sounds like a twisted way to gain control, Shade said softly, his gaze intent. And if it's circulating in the bar, then whoever's behind this has serious intentions to corrupt or control power players within the supernatural world. Darren leaned in, his eyes flashing with mischief as he added, I say we pay the bar a visit, not just to scope it out, but to let our friends there know that Echo Division isn't blind to what's happening. Karina looked up, her voice steady but carrying an edge. If we're going, we're not just scouting, we're sending a message. I want answers from the trader, and I'm not going to waste time going around in circles. Gunnar looked at her, nodding. Agreed. But we do this smart. If we storm in there with all guns blazing, we'll tip them off before we even have any leads. We go in calm, cautious, but ready for anything. Darren smirked, resting his hands behind his head. Calm, cautious, ready for anything. Sounds like my kind of party. The others couldn't help but share a small, knowing smile. The low hum of the holomap filled the workshop's meeting room, casting eerie blue light across the faces gathered around the table. Gunnar stood at the head, his gaze fixed on the pulsing dots scattered across the holographic display. Each mark represented a suspected case, a potential victim or a dealer of the strange new drug circulating through the city's hidden channels. Eli, run it back from the beginning, he said. nodding at the technomancer, whose violet eyes gleamed in the glow of the display. Eli tapped a few controls, zooming in on the locations highlighted. We've confirmed 3 sites with drug residue, all in supernatural hotspots. This drug isn't just designed to affect supernaturals, it's almost targeting them, binding to their auras. Attention settled over the room as each member absorbed her words. Darren lounged in his chair, his expression more intense than usual as he eyed the map. Ashley was silent, her posture rigid, and Karina sat forward, her arms crossed tightly. Shade leaned against the wall, half hidden in shadow, his dark gaze fixed on the map with a quiet intensity. Sophia has a faint beeping sound. Her eyes narrowed as she listened to the message, her face going taut with concern. She turned to Gunner through, the hollow generator. Homeland just forwarded a request from local law enforcement. They've encountered... Well, they don't know what they've encountered. A supernatural, out of control and violent. They're asking for backup, Sophia said, her voice grave. The room went still. Darren's eyebrow lifted and a grin tugged at the corner of his mouth. Local police want our help? This'll be a first. They don't know it's us and we're keeping it that way, Sophia replied sharply. As far as they're concerned, we're Homeland contractors. The less they know, the better. Gunner gave a firm nod. This drug could be behind it. If it's causing that kind of reaction, we need to see it firsthand. He scanned the room, his gaze meeting each of theirs. Darren, Ashley, you're up front. Keep the locals occupied. Eli, I want a full scan of that site. Shade, you're on the perimeter. No one sees anything they shouldn't. Shade inclined his head, his dark eyes glinting. I'll make sure we're invisible. Sophia's voice cut through the room. Your Echo Division. Remember, to them, you don't exist. Stick to protocol, gather intel, and get out clean. We need answers, not casualties. Karina leaned forward, her expression intense. If that drug is harming someone, I won't just stand by. We're stopping this. Gunner nodded. Agreed, but we do it strategically. No risks, unless absolutely necessary. Everyone gave a short nod, each slipping into mission mode. Eli snapped her case shut, securing her scanning equipment, while Darren casually loaded his shotgun, Thunderstrike, the sleek weapon humming softly as it powered up. Ashley checked her handgun and compact tools, her face set in quiet concentration. Shade adjusted his stance, his silhouette fading into the shadowed corner as he prepared to move. Karina, her katana at her side, tightened her grip on the hilt, a determined fire in her eyes. As they left the workshop, each member steeled themselves for what lay ahead. The night air outside the warehouse was heavy with tension, the distant blare of police sirens echoing off the buildings. A few officers milled about the entrance, their faces drawn and wary, eyes darting to the darkened windows of the warehouse. Echo Division approached the scene with practiced calm, blending into the shadows as they neared the police line. Gunner lifted a hand, signalling the team to stop just shy of the officer's view. He nodded to Darren and Ashley. Front and center. Keep it simple. Darren adjusted his grip on Thunderstrike, shooting a playful glance at Ashley. Shall we? She rolled her eyes but gave a small, determined smile. Just try not to scare them off. They approached the police barricade where a few tense officers eyed them suspiciously. One of them, a grizzled sergeant with a no-nonsense expression, stepped forward, scanning their gear and weapons with a raised eyebrow. And who exactly are you? He demanded. Darren flashed a badge, his grin disarming. Homeland Security contractors. Heard you've got a situation that's a little... unusual? The sergeant's expression shifted, a mix of frustration and relief. Unusual doesn't cover it. Whatever that guy is, he's tearing up the place, and my men can't get close without getting hurt. Darren nodded sympathetically, glancing back toward the warehouse. Let us handle it. Just keep your team back. Things might get... complicated. The sergeant hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the prospect of stepping aside, but finally nodded. He's all yours. Just try not to bring the whole building down. Darren shot him a wink. We'll do our best. With the police retreating to the perimeter, Gunnar motioned for the team to enter. They moved quietly, stepping through the doors and into the darkened interior. The air was thick and stale, a faint metallic scent lingering like a warning. At the far end of the room, they saw him. A man hunched in the shadows, his body trembling, his movements erratic and jerky. His skin was pale, almost translucent in the low light, and his eyes stared blankly ahead, wide and unseeing. A dark, sickly aura pulsed around him, twisting and writhing like a living thing. Eli raised her device, scanning the air. Her face tightened as she read the results. It's the drug. His aura's been saturated with it, amplifying his strength and cutting off his control. If he's been in here long, he's gone critical. Karina's jaw clenched, her hand drifting to her katana. She could feel the chaotic energy radiating from him, the unnatural darkness clawing at his essence. The man let out a low, tortured groan, his body contorting as he staggered forward, his fingers clawing at his own skin, his head snapped up, his gaze locking onto them with a primal rage that sent a chill through the room. Gunnar held up a hand, his voice calm and steady. We're not here to fight. Let us help. The man's eyes flashed, a guttural growl rumbling in his chest. His limbs twitched, his body moving with an unnatural, jagged energy, as though he were being pulled by invisible strings. Darren shifted his stance, raising Thunderstrike. Boss? He doesn't look interested in a conversation. Gunnar's gaze didn't waver. Hold position. He's still in there somewhere. The man lunged forward, his hands outstretched, fingers curled like claws. Eli's device beeped urgently as she adjusted the settings, scanning for any information that could help. If I can stabilize the charge, I might be able to neutralize it, but I need time. Karina stepped forward, her katana drawn. I'll give you the time. Gunnar shook his head, holding her back. We moved together. He's unpredictable. The man's growl grew louder, his eyes wild as he launched himself toward them, his movements frenetic and disjointed. In one fluid motion, Gunnar activated his cybernetic arm, the silver dagger extending from his wrist as he moved to intercept. Darren fired a warning shot, the blast from Thunderstrike echoing through the warehouse. The man staggered, but he didn't fall. Instead, he straightened, a twisted smile spreading across his face, his gaze locking onto Darren with a feral glint. From the shadows, Shade's eyes narrowed, his hand resting on the hilt of his dagger as he assessed the situation, ready to intervene. Eli adjusted her device, her fingers moving quickly as she recalibrated. If I can reverse the polarity, I might be able to weaken the bond between the drug and his aura. Gunnar gave a short nod. Then do it. Now. Eli's device hummed louder, a faint glow radiating from its core as she recalibrated. The man's face contorted in rage, his body tensing as he prepared to lunge again. In the dim light, his veins pulsed a sickly black, dark tendrils snaking across his skin. Ashley slipped into position, her handgun trained on him as she waited, steady and silent. And then, in one swift motion, the man leaped toward them, a guttural roar escaping his lips. Just as he reached them, Eli's device emitted a high-pitched tone, the glow intensifying. The man froze, his body convulsing, dark energy flickering around him as the drug's hold began to weaken. He let out a strangled cry, his body spasming as the tendrils of darkness around him began to recede. Gunnar stepped forward, his voice calm, but commanding. Stand down. We've got you. The man's eyes met his, a flicker of recognition flashing through the haze. Slowly the dark aura around him faded, leaving him weakened, trembling. Eli's shoulders sagged in relief as she powered down her device. It worked. For now. Karina moved closer, her gaze softening as she looked at the man. You're safe. We'll make sure this doesn't happen again. But as she spoke, a faint, dark shimmer pulsed through his veins again, a chilling reminder that their battle with this drug was far from over.